and welcome to SCG Global Spin. Your host today is Stephen Younger. Stephen is a partner at Patterson Belknap, a New York City-based law firm where he has been for over 35 years. He is a leading commercial litigator who is also well known for his alternative dispute resolution work. In addition to Patterson Belknap, he was the past president of the New York State Bar Association, an organization of over 75,000 New York attorneys. Joining Stephen today is Jose Ricardo de Bastos Martins. Jose Ricardo is a partner at Peixoto & Curry Avogados, a Sao Paulo-based law firm. His practice focuses on corporate law and compliance with an outstanding performance in cross-border mergers and acquisition, among other areas of experience. Jose Ricardo has a bachelor's degree from the University of Sao Paulo and a master's degree from New York University. Before heading the M&A practice at Peixoto & Curry, he worked for several years in New York City at Stairs, Dillon Beck & Finley, and Sidley & Austin.
Well, thank you so much. And it's my privilege to be here with my friend virtually, Jose Ricardo from Sao Paulo. So let me start off with an easy question. Do you prefer coffee or tea or something else?
Definitely coffee. You know, being Brazilian, having one of the best coffees in the world, I would stick to coffee.
Great. Now let's turn to a serious topic. Can you describe for us how COVID-19 has impacted your country in Brazil?
You know, COVID-19 hit Brazil very hard, as you all know. We are still fighting through this disease, trying to get it under control. Parts of Brazil are starting to see a decline, but parts of Brazil still not. We are a large country, so we have to look at region by region to understand how it is impacting each region and the country as a whole. Our economy, we were just getting out of a recession when COVID-19 came out. So we were really already in the middle of a big economic mess, and this has all been enhanced by the challenges brought by COVID-19. We are not expecting things to get better before the end of the year, both in terms of getting the disease more under control nationwide, and also in terms of economy. We were going through a series of important political reforms, a tax reform that was long needed, and all those items in the agenda kind of got frozen because of the needs to focus on fighting the disease.
So let's talk about your day-to-day work. First, are you still working from home? And what's been the biggest adjustment you have had to make to address this pandemic in terms of your work style?
We did not stop working one single day because of the pandemic, but since March 16, we have all been working from home and still are and will be like this for another month, at least, most likely. The biggest challenge was to really put 160 people all working at home in a couple of days. The first week or 10 days were really challenging. We had to buy infrastructure, make sure we understood the situation of each member of the firm, both admin people and the lawyers. Some needed more help. Some already had some infrastructure at home that helped. So the challenge was really to make sure that we would have everybody as comfortable as possible working from home so we could keep the ball rolling. Now that it's been more than 3 months, and I can tell you that it did work. But it wouldn't have worked so well if we did not have so much collaboration from each member. Everybody put an extra effort to make sure that we could, go on with our activities, even working remotely. I think it's working fine, but everybody's eager to get back to the office, even gradually. But, I think our profession requires some kind of eye contact, and the day-to-day without being able to interact with our colleagues is a big challenge that we are overcoming, but hopefully not for too long.
So can you describe for us whether any new types of client requests or new practice initiatives that you've developed that were brought about by COVID-19?
Steve, starting with my area of practice, two very important trends coming out of this. One is distressed assets M&A. Definitely clients are already looking for that. Brazil is perceived to be a country of a lot of opportunities. We were going on the right track with the reforms once the pandemic started. So now the assets have a much lower value, and the investors that were already considering Brazil are betting that after the pandemic, we get back on track. So the price of those assets has become very attractive, and we see an incremental number of transactions happening in that area. The second area of threats that I think is changing dramatically because of the pandemic, as I believe it will be anywhere in the world, is contract renegotiation. We have very important arguments here to raise when we discuss the balance between the parties in a contract and the imprevisibility and the lack of control that the parties have over the effects of the pandemic. So this brings a lot of discussion to the table, and it's proved to be a very important area for us since the pandemic started. Apart from that, and even more importantly, it's not my area of practice, but also very importantly, we have very interesting changes, transitory changes in the labor laws. Brazilian labor laws are considered very protective towards the employees, and we saw very important flexibilization of those protections in the context of this pandemic. It's not supposed to last forever. It's just transitory. So we, once we have the pandemic behind us, the laws will probably go back to where they were. But for now, the government is accepting employers to enter into private negotiations with employees, which is something that normally was not allowed. We would require the need of a union. There have been flexibilizations in the mandatory benefits that employees are entitled to and things of that nature. And finally, on the tax side, also important pieces of legislation calling for deferrals in some kinds of in the payments of some kinds of taxes, and also some programs to incentivize companies not to be under default with their taxes, pushing the payments for the near future, but not necessarily for now. So those are actions taken by the government, basically aiming at helping us get through the pandemic. Not changes that will last forever, but they have been very important to help companies navigate through these crazy times.
Now, you used the word collaboration. How is collaborating with your colleagues and perhaps more importantly, with your clients changed because of the pandemic?
I think there is actually a very positive takeaway that we can already point to in terms of the learning process that we are experiencing here. We used to have presidential meetings. São Paulo is a very big city. This is where our main office is. So we would spend a lot of time going from one place to another, stuck in traffic and things of that nature, as you can imagine, very similar to New York City. And now we just realized that we can be much more effective working and having a lot of meetings virtually. For some meetings, although we're doing them virtually, I believe that as soon as we can, we will get back to presential meetings. But for a great part, I would say more than 50% of the things that we used to do presentially, I think we now learn that we can do that virtually without getting any downside for not being presentially speaking with a person. The part that I think will, once we get back to new normal, we would like to resume in terms of presential meetings is basically the big negotiations, the court hearings that we're also doing remotely now, and the face-to-face meetings with clients. That's the most challenging part, I guess. But clients, are experiencing the exact same thing, so they also understand that we cannot be there with them. So I think they are also learning that a bunch of meetings can happen virtually, and it's working fine. But again, the word collaboration. Everybody needs to take an extra effort. Needs to be. One word that we have been using here a lot is empathy. So you need to understand what kind of restructure each person has in their homes, and make it work, knowing that not always those conditions will be perfect. What we have now in our group of members is not everybody working in a perfect environment of home office, as we believe it will be after the pandemic's gone. What we have in the case of many people, both clients and members of the firm, is people trying to adapt to a new routine without having had the chance to put together the right infrastructure, and without having the chance perhaps to have their kids in school, or other things that cause a little bit of disruption in the way they work. So now we are all trying to survive this stage, and maybe in the new normal we'll have a much more effective home office policy for the firm. But without collaboration, that wouldn't be possible.
How has this current reality sparked your firm-wide planning and programming? Do you have any special initiatives that you've developed in order to stay current and connected with your clients?
Yes, Steve, we have a couple of initiatives that started with the pandemic. Again, I think it's another positive aspect of this process. We were not very much into webinars or small groups of people talking virtually. I mean, both partners and clients. We would always try to do that in a presential meeting. And this is one of the things that we started to do. We felt after a couple of weeks we needed to be as close as possible to the clients. There were a lot of pieces of legislation coming up with dramatic changes to the way things happen in Brazil, especially on the labor and tax side. And clients wanted to know about it. So we started to put together a bunch of webinars with specific subject matters, sometimes more generalistic, but very, 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 very slowly clients started to get aware of this. And a couple of weeks later, we started to have very, very high attendance for those webinars. This is one of the initiatives that I would definitely mention. Inside the firm, we also realized that without having to incur the challenges of moving from one place to another, we could actually have meetings among the partners more periodically than we used to have. So now we are meeting every week, and it's also helping the decisions to be taken more quickly and more effectively, as they should during these times of pandemic.
You described the economic downturn that you were starting to come out of before the pandemic started. What's the current outlook for your country today, Jose Ricardo?
Well, as we start to see a stabilization country-wise, and a decline in some of the most important parts of the city, especially in the country, especially the state of São Paulo, which was the hardest hit so far in terms of the pandemic, now is starting to experience a decline in the number of cases and deaths as well. So being the most powerful engine of the Brazilian economy, I think this is starting to indicate that we might be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of surviving the pandemic. One of the biggest challenges that we have is that a big part of our economy is informal, and that people were hit much harder than anybody else with the effects of COVID-19. So now that we are seeing the worst getting behind us, we can start to be a little bit more optimistic that those reforms will perhaps start to be voted again in the second semester when Congress gets back to its winter break in August. And as a result of that, I have to be optimistic about the future. But it's not going to be without a lot of hard work. And some of our clients are already telling us that it might take 2 years until they get back to what they believe would be their projections for the end of this year. But the fact that clients are already trying to make a projection is already a good indication that we have reasons to be a bit more optimistic than 3 or 4 months ago.
Now let's turn to your government. Has the government initiated any sorts of financial support or stimulus packages in order to mitigate the impact of the pandemic?
Yes, in addition to pushing the Congress for those measures that I just mentioned, the government did put together a program providing for monthly allowances to that part of the informal economy I just mentioned. So this has also been incredibly important to keep that people with the minimum conditions to survive the crisis. This was a very important initiative the government took, but I should also mention that another important aspect is that we started fighting the pandemic in parallel with a big political turmoil in Brazil, a lot of polarization between the rightists and the leftists in Brazil, as we had not seen in our recent history. And the fact that pandemic hit us hard in the middle of this was not helpful. So it took us a couple of months of fights between areas of the government, between state governors and the president, to get a more stabilized and more clear path to fight the pandemic and leave those things for later. I think we're starting to see the first positive results of this, what I hope to be a new path of relationship between the president and the state governors. This is also important to help us, get rid of the crisis as quickly as possible. So this new attitude taken by the government in the last couple of weeks, combined with the fact that perhaps we will start to see a decline in the contaminations in the country, are very important aspects that we should take into consideration for this answer.
Jose Ricardo, you've already shared with us some of the major legal changes. How about your courts? Are they physically open now? Are they operating virtually? How is your court system working?
Until the end of June, the courts were operating virtually. Now, some of them will start to operate with some reduced capacity, but allowing counselors to visit and also participate presentially in some of the hearings. This will probably only start to pick up after the winter break in August. So perhaps the month of July will be a month of accommodation for the courts to really put in place the necessary protocols for this. But during this entire period of pandemic, the courts never stopped working. Brazil has a very, very modern system in which all the cases are digital. So it was possible to file petitions, to participate in non-presential hearings, advocating motions and things of that nature during the entire period of the pandemic. But of course, being a litigator, as you know, you will know better than anybody that lawyers want to be face to face with the judge when it comes to an important argument, right? So many lawyers were trying to reschedule their hearings for push their hearings a couple of months so that they could do it presentially. And most courts have been granting those requests. So I think that although we can say that we never stopped working, we have one of the most modern systems in the world. We have our 290 million cases all digitalized, but it's still important in several instances to be face-to-face with the counterpart of the judges, clerks, whatever. And this will only be possible, I believe, starting gradually from August on.
Now, you described some of the difficulties you've had with your president. I think we can perhaps share some sympathy among ourselves. How has the relationship between, say, the federal government and the state government worked in addressing the pandemic?
Wow, it was very bad in the beginning. It started to get better a couple of weeks ago. After more than 3 months of a lot we were for 3 months, we're really in the middle of this tug of war between those two sides. And now, perhaps in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we started to see a little more flexibility from all sides. And we think we now have adopted a common path where we can really do what's most important for the country now, which is to fight the pandemic, to make sure we have the right protocols, and are taking this health crisis as serious as we should. This should help us also resume the agenda of important political reforms, on top of which I would say we have the administrative reform and for the federal government, and the tax reform, aiming at simplifying our tax system, which is a challenge in itself. I guess that's a good way to describe it.
All right, now let me ask you to pull out your crystal ball. We want to have your predictions. We're not going to hold them to you, and we won't come back and judge you later. But tell us what you think the next 18 to 24 months will look like for Brazil. What will the new normal look like as we move through this pandemic?
Clients always want to get those predictions from us, right? And we, every time we dare making a prediction, they normally don't materialize, and they hold them against us. I know you wouldn't do that. So I think my prediction, Steve, is that this is going to be certainly one of the worst years of our history, economically speaking. And I think it's going to take a couple of years for us to get back as we were hoping to be in the beginning of this year. Really, some businesses were hit really hard, and it's not going to take just a couple of months. Once the pandemic's behind us, there's a lot of work to be done to just recuperate part of the businesses, and all the important reforms that were already late would probably need another year or so until we pass them. So my prediction is that it's going to take a while, but we get out of this much stronger than we were before, because we learned about important things. We learned about bringing people together. We learned about solidarity. We learned about the nice aspects of doing things virtually. Not all of them. The ones that we will get back, once we get back to normal, we'll be doing presentially. We will pay much more attention to. We will value those much more. So I think that my prediction is that it's going to take a while, but we will get out of this much stronger, and hopefully in a very good position to compete internationally in areas that we have been able to improve even during the pandemic. I talk about commodities production. I talk about alternative energy, biofuels, and things of that nature. The country is still working, very solidly, intensively in those areas, and that should help us be more competitive once the crisis is behind us.
To close this out, let me ask you something that's been on all of our minds. What is the one thing you think that has changed during this pandemic that you think will last forever, that will be with us as we go through life post-pandemic?
There are many, but I might be a little bit repetitive here, but I really think that this new way of working, where people could be great part of their time working from home, I think this has come to stay. So, in other words, I don't think we will ever see the firm as full of people as we used to see before. I think that's in the past. So I already see, by the way, a lot of firms talking about remodeling their offices, getting much smaller spaces with a totally different approach. And my firm is following that exact same trend. So we are revisiting the need for so much space. We think we will need to invest more in helping people to have the right conditions to work from home, not all days of the week, but perhaps 2-3 days of the week. So what we're going to see, I guess, as a definitive change after the pandemic is that people will be working a couple of days from home, will be coming to the office will be perceived as a totally different thing. The office will be a place where we come when we need to meet someone, when we have a meeting, when we have a client, when we have an event, or maybe because we want to decompress and just, chat with a couple of friends. Maybe there, the space for that will have to be rethought completely. And this physical space that we call the office would be a totally different thing for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Jose Ricardo, for sharing these thoughts with us today. I must say I miss meeting you in person. We've had so many good times together. Virtually is a lot of fun. But thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
And now back to you, Kate.
And that concludes our recording. Thank you for joining us today. You can find this and many other episodes at scgglobalspin.com. We hope to see you soon.